Greetings, everyone. This is Darcenovia here. Sorry for the stream being late. And sorry for the lackluster stream I attempted to do with the first 4 X-Wing novels. It was not a good stream. And I felt like you guys deserve better than a lackluster short stream that could have easily have been a regular review on my main Legends review series. So I figured, you know what? Before I do Mandalorian, before I do Light of the Jedi, why not just do another open discussion stream? That'd be the better, way to continue what I did with the first podcast. So the X-Wing book podcast never happened. And this is the podcast that's replacing it. I'm doing fine. You were lucky you got here at the beginning because the stream has just started. Now, what is dual canon? Now, this was explained before, but I'll explain it again for those of you who haven't watched, that podcast that I was a part of. Dual canon is essentially people that can enjoy canon and legends. Nothing more, nothing less. Dual canon is essentially an attempt to try to bridge the legends, fans with the people that follow the canon so they could basically get along and enjoy Star Wars, together. That's essentially the goal of the dual canon, it's not a movement. The dual canon community. It is not, met for anything more than that. It's just for legends and canon to, people who follow both, one or the other both, just to enjoy Star Wars together because we have more in common than we think. And we're not enemies. The people who follow the canon are not our enemies. For those of you who prefer legends, those who prefer canon, legends, fans are not your enemies. We enjoy Star Wars in a different way than you. And we see Star Wars in a different way than you. There is really no right or wrong, way to really enjoy Star Wars. But unfortunately, there's people I'm mostly going to refer to the fandom menace because let's be honest here, they're the most dominant fucking, voice out there that's essentially dictating what is a Star Wars fan. Now, that is a question that I like to, ask. What is a Star Wars fan? What does it mean to be a fan of Star Wars? Because to me, I don't believe there's one kind of fan or even two. Like I said with the Major Lee, teardown video, if you watch that, video on the War on Nerds, there's multiple kinds of Star Wars fans. Honestly. There's those who only, like legends. There's those who follow the canon. There's those who only follow the movies. There's those who mainly follow the TV shows. There's those who probably the rare kind of fans that enjoy both canon and legends. And then there's those who enjoy everything Star Wars. And honestly, there is not just, one or two groups of, Star Wars fans. There's multiple groups of Star Wars fans. It's just the loudest groups of Star Wars fans are the ones that are the most dominant. The most dominant being the Disney cultists and the fandom menace. Which, to me, I just see them as the same side of the same coin. Dictating what is and what isn't Star Wars. What is and what isn't a Star Wars fan. Yeah, that is true. For me, I prefer Legends, honestly. Mostly post Return of the Jedi. Because I love the original trilogy. I grew up with the original trilogy. I also grew up with the prequels. I preferred how Legends continued, Luke's story. I hated how Luke's story ended in The Last Jedi. And it felt like, in my opinion, those who worked on the sequels, they didn't really love Star Wars at all. They only loved it for superficial reasons. And the only person I felt that truly got Star Wars was, and I'm going to get hate for this, Ryan Johnson. I don't think J.J. Abrams understood Star Wars at all. And it was a mess. And to me, the sequel trilogy will always be something that I can't really get behind when it comes to, like, post Return of the Jedi. And for me, the only way I can enjoy post Return of the Jedi if I read the EU, because those are the stories I prefer. I prefer, the storyline where Luke Skywalker revives the Jedi. I prefer, the storyline where, they have to deal with different threats, not just deal with with the Empire, except the Empire looks like a bunch of action figures this time. Of course, then, not everything Canon has done has been terrible. I mean, the High Republic shows promise, what I've been reading of it so far. And honestly, I think the canon could be, as good as Legends if, you have a group of people that are passionate enough about it, and Lucasfilm allows these writers to actually write instead of being so worried about if a movie or a show is going to contradict this, or they don't want, a book to do something because the show, they may want to do a show about it. They need to let the EU writers actually just write. The new canon, they just need to let them write, because the biggest problem that gets in the way of creativity is canon. Canon is a big obstacle to, writing good stories at this point in Star Wars. Canon is the reason why, there hasn't been anything that has really stood out in the new canon so far, because they're so concerned about what is and what isn't canon, or they may want to do this because it may violate canon later, where it's not fun reading these stories, because these stories feel so flat and milquetoast that it doesn't feel like, you're reading, a Star Wars story. It just feels like you're reading a corporate, book. If you compare this to Star Trek, which the Star Trek books are not canon, they never have been. But if you compare and contrast Star Trek to Star Wars, they're not concerned with violating canon in the Star Trek, literary verse, because the Star Trek literary verse, those books, what's their priority is telling stories, not trying to, keep in canon with the movies or the shows. That is the problem with Star Wars at this point. Stories is not the main focus when they tell new stories and the supplemental material. What I've read, The High Republic, what I've read, Light of the Jedi so far, it's probably the first time I've genuinely enjoyed anything new in the new canon. It gave me that sense of wonder that I had when I was reading a Legends book. And I know this is gonna sound weird, because I've been very critical towards the High Republic. I really have. I've said some things that are not too flattering about the High Republic. Even if the High Republic does turn out to be flawed, I prefer experimentation. I would prefer the High Republic to tell some stories, even if it may not completely line up with the prequels or the original trilogy. For too goddamn long, honestly, especially since the new canon has started, it's been playing it safe. And I'm sick and tired of Star Wars playing it safe. And I would make an argument. Even the EU started to get to this point. Towards the very end of it. And I love the original trilogy characters, but I really did feel like the one of the biggest flaws with the post Return of the Jedi expanded universe. And I will say this: Luke, Han, and Leia, those characters, they pretty much have plot armor for the most part. They're not going to die when you read these books. Now, not plot armor is neither good or bad. I mean, I love Luke, Han, and Leia. I mean, they have suffered, egregious injuries in the post Return of the Jedi, but I feel like it was getting to the point where Luke, Han, and Leia were approaching their 60s. Han was approaching his 80s, and they were still doing stuff that these people should have retired by now. Don't get me wrong, I love Luke, Han, and Leia, but even in the EU, even it was getting to a point where these characters have to be retired at some point. And it feels like the authors were too afraid to let go of Luke, Han, and Leia in the expanded universe. If there's one criticism I would have of the post Return of the Jedi, expanded universe, it would be that. Luke, Han, and Leia, being completely safe for the most part, because the authors were too scared, and not to mention George Lucas would never allow, those characters be killed off or just retired, because we all love Luke Skywalker. At least I would hope so. But you have to retire him eventually. And of course, the way I wanted Luke to be retired is not in the way they did it in The Last Jedi. But Luke, doing something that, one last, heroic sacrifice that would have, helped save his family and friends. That's how I imagine Luke going out. And I didn't imagine Luke just being a deadbeat and not doing anything to help save the galaxy. That's how I imagine Luke going out. Han and Leia, I imagine them probably, dying together on board the Millennium Falcon. And for the rest of their kids, I can't say. But at least one of the biggest weaknesses with the EU is, the authors were too afraid to take chances, with established characters, because that's just my opinion. Now, what the biggest issue with the new canon is that in reverse. Because they're so concerned about if they're going to do this in a TV show or a movie, they don't allow the writers to actually write stories. Why is the Thrawn trilogy so critically acclaimed? Why is it still loved 30 years later? Why? Because it was a good story. It was a great follow-up to Return of the Jedi. It was you had an author that understood the Star Wars universe that wrote Star Wars. The Thrawn trilogy took Star Wars into new heights. It actually expanded the universe. It actually, opened up the doors for more stories to be told. Now, the Thrawn trilogy was a great story on its own, and it left an opening for many stories to come. And the new canon, up until this point, before Light of the Jedi, Test of Courage and Whispers in the Dark, I think that's what the one is called. It's coming out in a few weeks. In Light of the Jedi, the new canon has been pretty much playing it safe, where authors, it feels like they're not writing Star Wars book, they're writing corporate books that are approved in corporate, board meetings. And even Timothy Zahn, with his writing prowess, is being, hampered. I can't say for, Chaos Ascends, whatever the hell they call the first book of the, new Thrawn trilogy. And I'm referring to the current one, not the first Thrawn trilogy in the new canon. It just, to me, what I like about Star Wars is expansion. I don't want just to read, a missing chapter that you probably could ignore in a character's life. I want something more than that. I want the story to mean something. Now, I will review Light of the Jedi in a few weeks because I have to go through it. I have to go through it thoroughly through the book and the audiobook, and I have to watch Mandalorian season 1 and season 2. So I'll get to that eventually. Of course, I'm going to address some comics. Oh yeah, Luke Skywalker. I've loved that to be a black series figure. I'm surprised they haven't done that yet because that would look badass. Honestly, the fandom menace are not really fans. I'm just gonna be honest. They just bitch for the sake of bitching. I mean, when was the last time you saw the fandom menace actually talk about legends? It go in depth with these stories. When was the last time you saw that? All they do is complain about whether it's like the High Republic. They're going to complain about some other imaginary thing. It's like all these people do is complain. All they do is go into comment sections of anything Star Wars and just flood them. Like the High Republic trailer. Like I'm sick of the fandom menace. I really am. I'm sick of them claiming they speak for the Star Wars fandom when most of the Star Wars fandom just either doesn't care about the High Republic or they're mildly curious about it. Most of the Star Wars fandom are not the fandom menace, and that's what the fandom menace, do not get. They're not the majority of the fandom. They really are not. I'm referring to Legends. I'm not referring to Canon, Attack of the Menace. You weren't there when I was discussing, Legends. One criticism I do have of Legends. Honestly, they did eventually die, but we don't know how they died in Legends. In the Legacy comics, they weren't alive anymore. Obviously, it was like 80 years after their last appearance. So we don't know how Han, Luke, and Leia died, in the EU. And I wasn't referring to the sequels. That it was just a criticism towards the EU. Well, if you're canon, it could also not just apply to the books, it could also apply to the shows, like Rebels, Clone Wars, Mandalorian, Resistance. I also consider that part of the new canon. I consider everything, other than the Clone Wars, part of the new canon. Well, with the exception of season 7 of the Clone Wars, that is. So that's what I'm referring to when I talk about dual canon. I don't just refer to the books and the comics in both canons. Okay, to answer your question, what is canon outside the movies? Like I said, I already mentioned the TV shows, but the books and comics. I mean, there's literal YouTubers that could help you if you care to know what's canon outside the films. Honestly, because they would know more about the canon than I do. Honestly. Yes, they do. Oh, and I do think at some point they were going to, write Luke, Han, and Leia out of the post-Return of the Jedi expanded universe. I think they were going to do that at some point. Had it continued, I think they would have retired them. And I do feel like eventually they would have actually, basically tied the early Legacy era with the late Legacy era. And I'm pretty sure they would have probably just changed the names of the eras, to late Legacy to early Legacy. And I do feel like if those two eras were the gap of them was basically full, they actually completely filled in the gap between those two eras, I would be content with what happened with the EU. If at least, the storylines of, the Skywalker's descendants were resolved, rather than just have it all be left with a cliffhanger that will never be resolved. Yeah, at least Chewie died a badass death. Robbie Downey Jr. would not be a good Thrawn. He doesn't have he just doesn't have it for me. I think the guy who played Khan in the new Star Trek films would be and Doctor Strange would be I think I could see him as Thrawn. He has the demeanor, he has the height, he has everything I would imagine in Thrawn. Okay, I cannot comment on that, to be honest. Let's see. The High Republic is kind of hard to find, at this point, unless you don't mind getting the Kindle. Yeah, there is a rich universe. It's sad, though, that a lot of the people that are so angry about Disney Star Wars, they can't just let it go and just enjoy Star Wars for what it is, or just look for another part of the Star Wars, universe. Nothing, Papa Wedge. I was just like talking about, Star Wars in general, canon and legends. I think there's one thing that canon does have over legends is it actually did take advantage of an opportunity that legends squandered, was do Padme novels. I am still appalled to this day that that Lucasfilm did not give Padme her own book series. During the prequels, I am just shocked that they didn't give her own book series. Considering, the era between Attack of the Clones and when Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones was ripe for material. Same thing with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And it was only, until the new canon that they actually took advantage of a opportunity that the EU squandered. I'm not against the new canon telling new stories, and that's what I would rather the new canon do. I would rather them not, tell the same stories the EU has already done. I mean, Dooku, A Jedi Lost, I was excited for that story when it was announced, but I was disappointed because it was not a Dooku story at all. It felt more like it was a Clone Wars episode more than a Dooku story, and it really did piss me off, considering how much I loved Master and Apprentice and how that gave us a glimpse of who Dooku was as a Jedi Knight. I still think they could fill in those gaps more. I'm disappointed that the new canon squandered an opportunity to expand Dooku's character, and it feels like Legends did a better job of actually explaining how Dooku, how he had a falling out with the Jedi with far less time than the canon did, with more time than it had. Yeah, I mean, that is true. And I know this is not going to be a popular opinion of mine. I do not think the Old Republic should be done in the new canon at this time. Because let's be honest here, if the Republic was done right now, people would expect Revan to be in a movie or a TV show. And that's the only thing people think of when they think of the Old Republic. And I'm sorry to say this, as much as I love the Old Republic era, the only thing that people really think about is the video game, Knights of the Old Republic. They don't think of anything else. They don't think of the comics by John Jackson Miller. They don't think of Tales of the Jedi. They don't think of the Old Republic MMO. They only think of the video game. And I personally think that it's way too soon for them to do their own version of the Old Republic, considering the fact that I feel like the new canon doesn't have its own era yet that truly stands out. Because let's be honest here, both the sequels and the original trilogy, the eras are exactly the same. There is literally no difference between them aesthetically. I mean, there's barely any difference. You have two eras of Imperials versus Rebels. And it's one of the reasons why I'm turned off by the sequels. I would rather Lucasfilm tell an original story in the High Republic before they do a reimagining of the Old Republic. Because I'm going to be honest, I want a new story. If they're going to tell Revan's story again, I want it to be a new story with Revan. Not a retold story, but done worse. I want a new story with Revan. Honestly. Because, and another reason why I don't think it's a good idea to do the Old Republic right now. The MMO is still going. It would be confusing to the average, fan if they saw, a Old Republic that's non-canon, the video game, and an Old Republic TV show, movie, or book and comic that is canon. It's better that they let the MMO run its course before they do their own version of the Old Republic. That's just my opinion. I would like them to use the same aesthetic as the comics, the games, and whatever. But right now, it's just way too soon to do the Old Republic. If there was an MMO running, sure, go for it. But it's just the reason why Star Wars is just it hasn't resonated with me is because we haven't really gotten new stories until 2019 with Mandalorian is when we really started to get new stories. I mean, yeah, we got new stories before Mandalorian, but when we really started to get new stories. I'm not the biggest Mandalorian fan myself, but I'll give credit where credit's due. At least Mandalorian is a different story with a new character. Even though it's the new canon version of the New Republic era, at the very least, they're trying something different and not doing what they've been doing prior to Mandalorian, just redoing the original trilogy but with different characters. That's the reason why the sequel trilogy doesn't resonate with me, because it's not a new story. And because I don't want to experience the original trilogy but with gender swap versions of different characters. I don't want that. I want new characters, new stories, new struggles. And that is why I will give the High Republic the benefit of the doubt, give it a chance, give it a fair review, say what I like about it, say what I don't like about it, because rather than be the fandom menace, which are going to complain about everything, okay, let's be honest here. If you look at the High Republic and compare it to the sequel trilogy, what do you see that's actually resembling the sequels? Nothing. The sequel trilogy is just the original trilogy, except the movies look like the ships look like action figures, the stormtroopers look like action figures, the character themselves look like the costumes, they look like action figures. It's just a toy commercial. That's what the sequel trilogy is. It's not really a series of films that's telling stories. And everything just looks so fake. Everything. It just doesn't resonate at all with me. Yet look at the High Republic so far. And I know a lot of people like to say, oh, it looks so much like the Old Republic. Motherfucker, have you not seen? I mean, it's dishonest to say the High Republic looks like the Old Republic when, if you look at the aesthetic of the Jedi, if you look at the aesthetic, of the ships, if you look at the new creatures, the High Republic has introduced, it looks like it's trying to rectify the mistakes they make with the sequel trilogy because they know they can't play it safe forever. Now, whether the High Republic is successful or not is irrelevant to me because if they, do this more, because I want more experimentation in Star Wars because this is Star Wars to me, is trying new things, exploring uncharted territory. Now, if the High Republic is successful, who knows what they'll do next. Yes, and that's the problem. The High Republic is a perfect opportunity for Lucasfilm and Disney to, learn from the mistakes they made with the sequel trilogy and not make them again. It's the perfect opportunity to actually move forward with Star Wars because at this point, there's no movies being made, and consider the fact that there isn't as much money to lose if they, do the High Republic at this point, because it's mainly going to be, books, comics, manga, and there might eventually be some video games in this era. Eventually, there isn't as much to lose as there is a movie. I would agree with that. But here's the thing. People want Revan. And I think Revan will eventually be in the new canon. The question is when, though. Revan, though, let's be honest here, Revan is a video game character. And it's up to the players who played Knights of the Old Republic to determine Revan's personality. And Revan's not going to be an easy character to adapt into a movie or a TV show. I actually think they should do TV shows if they're going to do if they're going to do the Old Republic, purely because they could actually expand the story and they don't have to cram it all in 3 films. Because I don't think you could do the Old Republic justice if it's just a trilogy of films. Or you could just basically have most of the Revan's, part of the story be, a movie trilogy and the other parts of the story be like a TV series. Like there is a part of Revan that has never been explored even in Legends. And that is something they could do. The Mandalorian Wars. Imagine them doing that as a way to bring Revan into the new canon. Tell a story that has never been told before, even in Legends. Because in the EU, we hear about the Mandalorian Wars, in the games, Knights of the Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic 2. We see glimpses of the Mandalorian Wars in the comics, but it's not explored as in depth as the other conflicts in Star Wars Legends. I would like the Mandalorian Wars to actually be explored. That would be a great idea. And as for Revan's personality, I don't know what they would do. Revan could be anybody or anything. Revan can even be a woman. And I just don't think you'd be able to please everybody with Revan's character, because everybody has their own idea who Revan is. And I feel like Revan is a character they'd have to be very careful when they eventually do adapt Revan. And I'm not going to use, anything, call Revan a he or a she, because Revan, to me, I don't care what Revan's gender is, because Revan's gender is completely irrelevant to the character, because Revan is the same character regardless of Revan's male or female. Yes, the High Republic is definitely the best place they could experiment before they actually start expanding Star Wars on screen again. So we can get away from the original trilogy aesthetic, because Star Wars needs to get the fuck away from the original trilogy. It's been riding on that dick for almost 50 years now, and it's time that Star Wars, lets go of the original trilogy aesthetic. I mean, Star Trek has got past the original series aesthetic decades ago. It's time that Star Wars does the same. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think the Old Republic MMO should actually, run its course. You know, so that's so yeah. Like I said before, the MMO should be able to end naturally and not be rushed because Disney wants to do, their own version of the Old Republic. I do think they want to do the Old Republic, but they can't because they don't want to confuse people with a MMO still running. So it's only a matter of time. I do think the next big project after the High Republic is going to be the Old Republic because there's no way they're not gonna want to do their own version of the Old Republic at some point. And here's the thing: I know I shouldn't be making predictions this soon. I predict towards the end of the High Republic era, you're gonna start getting mentions of Jedi and Sith that were alive during the Mandalorian Wars or their version of the Mandalorian Wars and the Jedi Civil War, at least their own version of it. You're probably gonna get mentions of Exar Kun, Revan, Malik, Darth Treya, and whatever Sith they're gonna reintroduce in canon. You're gonna see. I feel like you're gonna see those name drops towards the end of the High Republic era because in the year leading up to the High Republic, there were name drops of various characters all over the canon in various canon works in order to set up the High Republic. I think the High Republic is going to do the same for their next big project, which is, I think, the next big project is going to be their version of the Old Republic. I don't think Revan should be canon yet. It's too soon. I just don't know how they're going to do it. Hey, what's up? To be honest with you, I want anybody but Keanu Reeves as Revan. Honestly, I don't imagine Keanu Reeves as Revan. Honestly, I just want to. I would prefer a unknown actor to play Revan than have Keanu Reeves. Yeah, I agree. Honestly, and there's no. Okay, I might give my opinion about it later when I talk about the High Republic. Yeah, they are. I agree. Actually, there's only two cannons, but yeah. Well, yeah. Hey, Falcon General, what's up? I personally think for Revan to be in a movie, Revan's character would have to be established first. That is true. I love the Old Republic, mostly the video games, not the rest of the era. I could take it or leave it. Uh Probably. I don't know what they're gonna do with Revan. And honestly, I don't care if Revan's male or female. All I care about if Revan's written well. Yeah, the Exarch was mentioned. I think he's a good lore channel. Yeah, it should be, honestly. Honestly, a lot of the contradictions in the new canon, as much as I hate to say this, they're not as difficult to fix as you would think. It just you have to be clever about it. They'd have to do it in a way where it's actually an interesting retcon. And I'll probably talk about this in further detail on what should be done with the sequels in a future stream, because I do feel like there is ways you could actually continue Star Wars past Rise of Skywalker, but you'd have to or writing Star Wars, stories in the sequel era, but because people, because the sequels as it stands right now, it would be very hard to write stories if you're trying to not contradict the sequel trilogy. So how would you, make stories with the sequel trilogy and not contradict them? Well, I will get to that at another time because, well, this is not about the sequel trilogy. I agree with you. I would rather have unknown actors play Revan, because when I see Revan, I don't see Keanu Reeves. I just don't see it. We don't need big actors. I don't know what I'm not. You should ask Jedi Master Daniel, because he's more up to date with the new canon than I am. I'm only interested in the High Republic era purely because it's something new. Then again, of course, I might get into detail with this more, but if you want to know a way they could get around the sequel trilogy, if they wanted to continue the sequels, or to write stories with the sequel trilogy, because let's be honest here, Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and New Republic Rangers, eventually it's going to lead to a point where it's not going to be believable there wasn't any big conflict before The Force Awakens. And I feel like the new canon, these certain books, have basically made it very difficult to write any stories in this era without contradicting what was established. And if I have to be real, I would jettison some of the books in the new canon. I would not actually bother trying to adhere to them. I would just ignore them. Like the Aftermath books, I would just basically only keep, certain aspects of them and disregard the rest, because I know a character from the Aftermath trilogy has appeared in Mandalorian, at least one of the characters, as far as I know. You could correct me on that because I'm not an expert on canon. So bloodlines, I think they could basically throw out for the most part. The sequel trilogy novelizations, they could just throw out because they contradict each other anyway. I don't know about the other prequel sequel era works, but I'm saying you'd have to throw out most of the post Return of the Jedi works in order to actually, because it was established that there's been peace in the galaxy for many years. Well, if you want to actually explain why things went to shit in the sequel trilogy, have a major war happen prior to the sequels, and the New Republic was severely weakened, like it was in Legends. But in order to actually do that, you would have to retcon the shit out of stuff that was established in the first few years of the new canon. Because as it stands right now, if you adhere completely to what's in the canon, you limit what you can do without contradictions. That's why I say fuck it, go crazy. In the New Republic era, have a fucking huge war like you did with the New Jedi Order. Who cares if it contradicts some, crappy books that were written, in 2015 through 17? Who gives a shit if it contradicts a few books? I mean, it's not like those books, mean much in the grand scheme of things anyway. I just feel like it would be much easier if you just completely ignored those works, and maybe actually have a tiered system when it comes to canon. So treat those works as S canon, instead of being fully canon. So only parts of those books happened and the rest of it haven't. Because honestly, there's just no way you could actually realistically have a cohesive and interesting era with the New Republic if you know adhere to the sequel trilogy. If you actually explain why the Republic was so weak by the time the sequels happen, you have an easy out for it. You get what I mean? Why was the New Republic so easily overwhelmed in the sequel trilogy? Oh, because there was a big war that happened prior to the sequel trilogy. Bam! It's get out of your jail free card. It is so easy. But the problem is you'd have to do something that is radical. Ignore what was established before. Retcon the shit that doesn't actually, serve any purpose but to boggle, down. Because let's be honest here, why should these shows that are coming out in the upcoming years be held back by a bunch of shitty books? I'm dead serious. Why should they be held back? They don't offer anything of value to the Star Wars universe anyway. Throw them out. Ignore them. You could still keep the movies, but at least you'd have more context to why, the New Republic was easily destroyed and why the military was almost non-existent. It is so easy. That is a way you can creatively retcon the sequel trilogy while the movies still are part of the Star Wars universe. And as for Luke Skywalker, what would you do with Luke? Okay, Luke Skywalker is established as a failure. What can you do to get around that? Simple. Make it so Luke Skywalker succeeded in training one class of Jedi, but the second class of Jedi he trained, he failed. Kylo Ren's class, where you could have him fail to train that one, and the rest of the Jedi. But what were they? During the sequel trilogy, they were dealing with a threat in the unknown regions. There's so much you can do. The Star Wars universe is littered with possibilities. The only limit is the imagination of these storytellers. Why the fuck should they should be boggled down by the sequels and the supplemental material related to them? No, it's not a hill worth dying on. If you want to know my solution for the sequel trilogy, that would be it as a way to keep them in canon, but be able to tell new stories that are exciting, but kind of treat the sequel trilogy like, yeah, they kind of happened. That's what I would do. Give me a fucking job, Lucasfilm. I just came up with a way to save your, crappy sequel era. Let's see. Sorry, just give me a second. I'm going to read some comments because I'm really curious. What do you guys think of my idea? I mean, I don't think it's such a bad one, honestly. Let's see. Oh, no, I've already addressed that. Let's see. Hold on, I'm sorry, I was looking. Let's see. Honestly, I'm not really interested in Marvel's new stuff. Maybe the High Republic, because at least it's a new era, but I'm not interested in the comics as a whole. Well, we're probably gonna hear they're still around at this point. We're gonna hear nonstop bitching about it. They're like, this is the fucking Star Wars equivalent of Captain Marvel. Brie Larson has been announced for Star Wars Acolyte. Oh my god, everybody hates Brie Larson. Well, I don't. I personally don't think they're gonna. I think they're gonna ignore the 30 years of peace because there's just no way you could do anything. If you want to do your own version of the Thrawn trilogy in the New Republic era, there's no fucking way you can freaking you do shit. That's why I'm saying that there. I think they just ignore. I just think all pretty much all the material prior in in the sequel era would have to be retcons if they wanted to actually not break canon. I'm not surprised. I know about that. Fuck Star Wars theory. And his fanboys. Yeah, I know about that. Yeah, and that's the thing. And that's the thing. What I'm talking about just now, a creative way to retcon the sequels. These conversations aren't being had in any of these groups. And dual canon, since I am a fan of Legends, I could take, what would work in the canon and Legends? You know what? Let's take these stories. Let's adapt. Let's take the stuff that would work and just put it in the new canon. I think the Thrawn trilogy could be a great story to adapt into the new canon. I think it would be amazing if we did the Thrawn trilogy. Of course, it'd be up to date because we'd have new characters, but I feel like that's what we could be having. How can we improve, the new canon? Yes, the sequel trilogy is an obstacle, but it's not an impossible one to overcome. The sequel trilogy, the only thing we would have to do is just ignore the stuff that's related to it. The sequel trilogy could still exist. It is possible to make the sequel trilogy coexist, but nobody, in these groups I'm talking about are creative enough to come up with creative retcons. They should literally hire me. I think I would do a good job. Then again, I don't think they would, like my ideas too much. I don't. To be honest, I think I don't. I used to like Captain Fordo, but I don't. I thought he was pretty condescending with his, you know, video with TCW. If I have to be real, and I just can't look at him the same. It's a very complicated, honestly. My feelings towards Tad Larkin. I don't actually, watch his videos anymore. I don't care what he does. Well, okay, here's the thing. My sequel trilogy ideas is not retconning is not writing them out of canon. It's to make sure they coexist, but it's mostly to remove the supplemental materials related to the sequels. If that makes sense, it does make sense what I'm saying, right? Because I think these are the conversations we need to have. Because honestly, being so fixated on the sequel trilogy, and I think that's the benefit about being a dual canon Star Wars fan. If you're dual canon, you're far more creative in how to find solutions. Of course, my solutions for the Star Wars canon for me, at least for my enjoyment of Star Wars, is the sequels never happened. They don't, it's fiction. We made it up. That's what the sequel trilogy is to me. They never happened. That's how I deal with the sequel trilogy. It's technically my head canon, yeah, but Star Wars is fiction at the end of the day. And if you enjoy both canons, then there's no reason why not maybe take aspects you like from both and have it be part of your huge head canon. Of course, I would never put Solo and the AC Crispin Star Wars books in one universe. That just would not fucking work. That'd be contradictory as fuck. I don't care about Boroman. Stop bringing him up. I hope they make Revan female and have her played by Bria Larson. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I think Star Wars theory is overrated. If that to be honest, honestly, Mora Jade, I'd only have her be canon if she's not Luke's wife. She shouldn't be canon. That's where I stand. And I do think they're gonna make her canon. There's no way they won't. She's just too popular. Though if I had it my way, for Mora Jade, I think they should just get a Scottish or an Irish actress to play Mora Jade. I mean, what? I mean, who? What the? I mean, what? Who? I mean, no, but there's nothing in Star Wars that says that she has an American accent. I've always imagined her having an accent from either Ireland or Scotland. Though I'd choose Ireland because of my Irish heritage. Oh God. Oh God, no. Oh God. Oh God. EA. Oh, I hate EA. Man, this stream has been actually, you know, pretty good. Far better than the first second, you know, podcast with the X-Wing books. I Yeah, that's true. But for me, if Mora Jade is going to be part of the new canon, yeah, she does have to go through a similar arc as does in Legends. But to me, she has to be Luke's wife, at least at some point. Otherwise, you know, there's no point in making her canon. And I don't see them not making her canon. She's too popular. She has a fan base. She's one of the most popular Legends characters. She's up there with Thrawn. There's no way they're not going to make her canon. Regardless what Timothy Zahn will say, it's not up to him if they make Mora Jade canon. It's up to Lucasfilm. And I don't see them not wanting to make Mora Jade canon. I do believe in the upcoming years, you're going to start seeing them bring more Legends characters into the new canon. I don't think you're going to see some of these characters, disappear forever. I do believe we may end up, seeing, some fan favorites from Legends become canon. The solo kids, I have no chance whatsoever. Unfortunately, is what I would love to see, you know, Jaina Solo and Jason, but then again, it wouldn't make sense because where the hell were they if they existed in the new canon? Well, I still feel like if you're going to do a new version of the Thrawn trilogy, you cannot not have Mora Jade. It wouldn't feel right if you did not have Mora Jade. It would not feel right. Well, I have a feeling if when 3 comes back, he's going to be far more of a threat than he is in Rebels because Rebels is a kids show. If they made Thrawn, like he was in Legends, freaking the entire Ghost crew would have been dead in his first appearance. They would have never been able to escape. Rebels would have probably ended in the first episode that Thrawn appeared. They had to tone him down. As unfortunate as that is, the same thing with General Grievous. If General Grievous was like he was in Legends, he would have killed pretty much every character in TCW except Obi-Wan and Anakin. So unfortunately, characters that were, really strong or really smart in Legends had to be toned down when they appeared in a kids cartoon. Well, the Thrawn trilogy, was more a Jade story. Of course, I would love to do a book club on those books. one of these days. I do plan on it. And I'm just waiting for more comments, honestly, because, I'm enjoying the engagement with the audience. Though, next week, don't expect as long streams as you got this week because, well, I'm pushing the limit when it comes to my StreamYard hours. No, I don't have the skills to do it. No, they won't. They've already you have stories that basically make it Shadows of the Empire impossible to happen in the new canon. And as unfortunate as that is, Shadows of the Empire will not be part of the new canon. It just cannot fit at this point. The X-Wing book club was garbage. The reviews I did on, the third and fourth book were better. Honestly. In a nutshell, I did it for 10 minutes. I didn't have it in me, and I ended it early. Honestly. And I learned from my mistake. I cannot talk about 4 books at the same time because I lose focus. I have to talk about one book. The Light of the Jedi, I'll be able to do a decent amount of time with it, at least 30 minutes or 40. Because I like to engage with my audience. I really do. Oh, God. Honestly, Rogue Squadron should be a show. From what I've read in the books, I don't feel like you can do that in a movie. And I think that's the problem with my biggest criticism towards Star Wars right now. Of course, this is a canon versus Legends, but it's appropriate for this. Lucasfilm is so fixated on making a movie that I feel like certain like concepts don't work as films. Rogue Squadron should be a TV series. Because how are you going to be able to build the relationship between the characters in a few hours? Honestly. And if it's a standalone movie, I don't think we're going to really care about the characters. I mean, Rogue One to me was forgettable. It truly was forgettable. I don't want a Rogue Squadron movie, a movie that, I love Rogue Squadron. The books are great. The video games are great. I don't want one of the greatest parts of Star Wars just to be a forgettable movie. Rogue Squadron deserves better than that. And considering the fact, we have the technology is getting to the point where it's cheaper to make high special effects. I just don't understand that. I really do not understand that. I just think they're wasting a great opportunity here to actually do, a Rogue Squadron film. Thanks. It should be a show. It's a wasted opportunity. And I think the problem is, I think the Star Wars films need to be an event, which is why I think these standalone movies don't need to exist. I really don't think we need standalone movies. If we're doing Star Wars TV shows that look like a movie in terms of the production value, why do we need these spin-off movies? They're not needed. We don't need these spin-off movies. We don't need, we really do not need like Rogue Squadron as a film. If we're going to do a standalone film, have that be a miniseries. With a miniseries, you'll be able to do it in a few hours. You'll be able to do like a 6 or 8 hour, TV series. And you could do so much more with the concept of Rogue Squadron. Hell, you could do it in multiple seasons. You could have it take place during the original trilogy, but from the perspective of Rogue Squadron. Hell, you could do it after Return of the Jedi. There's just so much shit you can do. Constraining yourself to films, it's just no. I think a movie has to be like something like, let's say you want to do Legacy. You want to do something hundreds of years after, you know, Rise of Skywalker. That's something you should do in a sequel trilogy, where the fuck you're going to call it. Because that's an event. Rogue Squadron, I'm sorry, it should be a it should not be a movie. That's why I wasn't really excited. Yeah, they're idiots. They haven't. They don't read. I would love if Star Wars Underworld had saw the light of day, because that would have been awesome. I mean, there's a chance, Lucas may not have ever sold Lucasfilm had that show been made. Honestly, it would have been great. I mean, who knows what kind of stuff they could have done with, Star Wars Underworld. If only, Lucas had waited like 10 years more, he could have gotten the show he wanted. And it would have been great. Star Wars Underworld could have been like the next big thing, Star Wars. But it wasn't meant to be. I do think we're going to see aspects of Star Wars Underworld, used in the future in these new projects. Who knows? We might get something like it in a future show. I don't know. Though if, Star Wars Underworld ever saw the light of day, George Lucas should be involved, because that was his baby. Nope, I haven't read the comics. I've only read the novels. I know, but then again, honestly, the Star Wars films are for the lowest common denominator. I feel like at this point, things are Star Wars. What's gonna, be the best part of Star Wars will not be the movies. It's gonna be the worst part of Star Wars. It's gonna be the shows. Will probably be the best parts of Star Wars, because the most creative ideas will not be done in the movies, because Hollywood and their obsession with trying to get the Chinese market. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and in that timeline, he basically probably told the fanboys, "Fuck off! I'm doing Star Wars my way." Well, Star Wars is his freaking baby. Star Wars, George Lucas, when he owned Star Wars, since he's the creator of this universe, he could do whatever the hell he wanted. We don't agree with, we may not agree with it, but it's George Lucas's freaking world. George Lucas's word is law, and we should respect that, whether we agree with it or not. Yeah, and I don't think Rogue Squadron will be a bad movie. It's just, I feel like, you know Disney and Lucasfilm are just scared of doing anything new. It's also because it's just they're trying to appeal to China, and that is what's sad. Anyway, I think this has been a pretty good stream, but I'm gonna have to end this, because I don't want to use up all my StreamYard hours, and I feel like this stream has been, pretty good. Anyway, guys, stay safe. May the force be with you, and see you guys next time with another video.